Recently, President-elect Donald Trump has been threatening to impose a new 25% tariff on the importations of all Canadian goods made in the United States. So today, we'll see together what could be the economical impact of such a measure on the Canadian economy. Hey, how's it going, guys? It is Olivier, and today, for the second reaction video on my channel, I'll be reacting to a video named The Real Impact of Trump's 25% Tariff on Canada and Mexico. So, without further ado, let's get to it right now.
Donald Trump just threatened a 25% tariff.
The tariff. The word tariff to me is the most beautiful word in the entire dictionary. We're going to tariff the hell out of them. I am a tariff man.
On all goods coming into the United States from Canada and Mexico. That would raise the price on food, medicine, cars, oil, lumber, concrete, and Trump's...
I also want to just add to this that he doesn't only want to put some tariffs on Canada and Mexico, but he also wants to add an additional % tariff on all the exportations made by China to have a certain price war, which could eventually lead to a certain price war with China. But I don't think that this video will cover it, but it is also another important tariff that could obviously have some significant impact, notably on the US economy for the future.
Says it would be a day one priority after his inauguration.
It's a bit of, rinse, wash, repeat, and that cycle going on again.
Even more of a negative downward pressure on U.S. economic growth.
Experts are warning this could eventually impact our wallets.
Yeah, this could directly impact our wallets.
But
this is also very important to understand that by putting and imposing tariffs, it won't benefit really anyone except maybe the US government that more money on taxes, but at the end of the day, the people in the United States will also need and will also be impacted by this type of measure, because in fact what will happen is that if you put, for example, a 25% tariff on Canadian goods, the thing that will happen is that it will increase the price in which it will be sold, so potentially of about 25%. So the consumers in the United States, for example, let's take the example of maple syrup. If we are exporting a lot of maple syrup to the United States, well, the US citizens will need to pay potentially 25% more to fight this type of measure. And because at the end of the day, what happened is that the companies will still want to keep as like their great profit margin, so they will still want to continue to be as profitable as they are currently.
There's one big problem when it comes to interpreting what Donald Trump is proposing here, because there's the policy and then there's the posturing, and it's not easy to tell which of the two is real. Let's go through it.
This is also very important. I guess that we'll see it with the video, but you obviously have the measures that are proposed. It has been proposed all throughout the election process in the United States. He eventually wanted to potentially penalize and put some different tariffs, for example, to Canada. But at the end of the day, those are all some proposals, but maybe it's just about the posture, because he wants to have a certain leverage when it comes to negotiate all the trading accords with Canada and with Mexico, and eventually maybe with China as well. Because, for example, we've seen that for his first mandate, Donald Trump has been hardly negotiating the past accord that there was, I think it was in 1990 or something like that, that was made between Mexico, Canada, and the United States. So potentially it could just be a certain type of posture that he wants to have, and to have more leverage eventually, because he knows that the United States weight way more compared to Canada and Mexico when it comes to trading.
The consequences are going to be devastating for Canada. The U.S. is our largest trading partner. Roughly 67–70% of the totality of our trade is with the United States.
A 25% tariff is effectively a 25% tax on whatever comes into the United States.
This is also very important to understand that I believe that Canada does export about 2 times more in the United States compared to all of the other worldwide combined together. So it is definitely our most important allies when it comes to trading. So such a tariff will definitely have a big impact on our Canadian companies as well.
United States, based on how expensive that thing is. So if a company's shipping in a $40,000 car, now it's a $50,000 car.
Yeah.
The company pays the tax, that makes the vehicle more expensive for the consumer, and the US government pockets the difference.
That's kind of what I told you earlier. It is that if you put a tariff on it, for example, if Ford, let's say, if we had like a Ford Air or like a Canadian, well, at the end of the day, the company is old and is directed by the shareholders, and the shareholders will not want to continue to invest in it if they are not able to keep the same profitability as they've been able to add in the past. So they need to find a way to keep the same margins. Obviously, it will be to increase the price of the things and of the goods that they export, but potentially it could also lead to massive layoffs and many people, notably in the manufacturing field, that could lose their jobs with such a measure.
The basic rule of supply is that if the price goes up, I want to produce more of this stuff. If the price goes down, I want to produce less. It means I need less workers, and so people start losing their jobs.
And this is a big problem for a country like Canada, because last year it exported almost $600 billion worth.
So that's very important and interesting to see the graphs about that. So $600 billion of exportations, and it is still way more compared to, take a look at the importations that they've made in 2023. So we are exporting more, it seems like, in the United States compared to what we are importing. So it is some interesting
worth of goods to the United States. That's more than 3/4 of all of Canada's exports. And Canada's trade relationship with the US is about 2/3 of this country's GDP. The top 5 exports: energy, that's mainly crude oil, and cars.
It is why also when it comes notably to the energy sector, it could also impact different big companies we have here. For example, Enbridge, I believe that distributing about 25% of all natural gas that is consumed in the US. So if President Trump when he will become the next president, decide to eventually put 25% tariff, it might also increase the global price of electricity in the United States as well.
And note, that includes car parts. The auto industry is a really good example of how damaging tariffs can be for those who have to pay them. Because cars aren't just built in one country. The engine might be built in one place, the transmission in another. Then
this is also very important because I've seen that President Trump actually threatened Mexico to potentially put a 100% tariff on all exportation different cars that are made in Mexico. So this would have some very bad impact globally on the US economy and as well on the Mexican economy if he decided to do that, because it will potentially make the price of cars skyrocket. And it was also a measure that could also impact one of his good friends, Elon Musk, as I presented in one of my previous videos that I've made, I think 1 or 2 weeks ago, because Elon Musk has a big a wide portion of its Tesla cars that are produced in China. So if a 10% tariff was also made and put to China, it will also massively impact different cars companies such as Tesla, even if they are not producing some classical gas cars.
They're assembled in yet another place, and all of these components can cross national borders multiple times before they magically turn into a car. A tariff charges a tax every time they do.
The average car crosses the border 7 or 8 times, 8, 9 times over the course of its production. Trying to unwind that in a way that doesn't hurt American consumers is an incredibly difficult task. I spoke to one trade analyst in the United States who said,
this is extremely, it will be an extremely hard task because, as I told you also, it is not necessarily the companies. If the companies could the same margin, at the end of the day, they would accept the tariff, but they will lose a lot of money from it. And people, like the companies, are controlled by the shareholders. So obviously it won't benefit anyone, I believe, these types of measures.
Tinkering even a little bit with the fundamentals of that trade organization is like doing surgery without anesthesia.
And consider how some parts manufacturers have plants on both sides of the Canada-US border, and many ship parts between locations constantly. A company like that would have to completely rethink its supply chain. or else face 25% higher costs, sometimes multiple times for the same product.
If you're a man,
This is notably, as I told you, the case of Enbridge that is present in both the Canadian and the United States market. So it could obviously impact different Canadian companies that are also evolving in the United States market, notably also different banks, for example, like the TD banks that is well present in the US market as well.
manufacturer that is responsible for that supply chain, would you not just move your supply chain entirely into the US and forget the idea of having to deal with tariffs entirely?
Then there's the impact on everyday Americans.
Canada provides raw goods. We send energy, we send lumber, we send steel, we send grain. So American consumers, if these go ahead, are going to get clobbered by essentially taxes on everything they consume.
You know how much fruit and vegetables?
This is also very important because, you know, the Canadian companies mostly, the big exportation, as we've seen, are mostly energy sources and we are actually exporting a lot of energy, for example, to the United States, and in the US, the energy cost is also way higher and it costs a lot more compared to Canada. So eventually, if he would decide to put some different tariffs on the Canadian companies, this will also make the price of energy, for example, skyrocket, which will have a direct impact on the wallet of the American people.
The US imports from Canada and Mexico. According to the US government, in 2022, about half of all fresh fruit and almost 90% of vegetables came from those two countries. All of that produce could become 25% more expensive, effectively overnight. Want to build a house? You might just be importing Canadian lumber and concrete. And the unfortunate side effect of tariffs is that they tend to start trade wars.
Yeah, this is also interesting to understand because, like, if we are currently exporting a lot of food to the United States and a lot of different things that are important, for example, to construct houses, well, it will, as I told you, have an impact on the American people, and at the same time, it could lead, as he told us, like, to a trade war, because usually what happens is that if, for example, the United States are threatening Canada, for example, to put a tariff, well, it can go on both sides, because at the end of the day, Canada could also decide to say, well, you know what, you are putting, like, for example, a 25% tariff on all our exportations. We're going to put, like, let's say a 30% or like another 20% tariffs on our importations that we are making in the United States. So it kind of goes both ways in that side. So it won't necessarily benefit any parties on that regard, I believe. And yeah, let's continue with.
They put tariffs on some stuff. We put tariffs on some stuff.
Getting into a tariff war with the U.S. is like getting into a fight with a giant, where for every punch you throw, you get four, back at you.
The last time the U.S. played hardball with tariffs, they didn't ultimately go very far.
Canada is bracing not just for the impact of tariffs, but potentially a larger trade war.
When Trump was last president, tariffs were part of a negotiation. A U.S. tax on steel and aluminum led to this.
President Trump's trade tariffs on Canada are sparking retaliation. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau promising comparable tariffs on the U.S.
Polite, we're reasonable, but we also will not be pushed around.
And in 2018,
yeah, I didn't really follow that in 2018. I was a bit younger, but I've heard that there was actually some threat of to add another on steel on all the exportations of steel in the US. So I guess that, as I told you earlier, it can be used as a type of leverage to eventually renegotiate different accords that they have together. So let's see what he had.
It was a really strange assortment of American products that Canada slapped tariffs on. Everything from ketchup to oranges to whiskey. But Heinz is co-headquartered in Pennsylvania, a key swing state. Oranges are grown in Florida. Whiskey is made in Kentucky and Tennessee. These are all states that voted Republican, and that pressure worked.
Everything ultimately settled back down to business as usual.
And get this, that same year, the Trump administration was mulling over a 25% tariff on all vehicles imported into the United States. Sound familiar? There was backlash.
Tariffs on autos, and auto parts will raise costs for our customers and their families.
And that threat...
I just don't understand what would be the impact of states, because I'm not too aware of like how it works in the United States in terms of like the power of states and stuff like that, because I don't understand what is the link between like having, for example, states that have Heinz, like companies like that are making some exportations like in Canada. Like what is the impact of it like being Republican or Democrats? Because at the end of the day, I guess that it is the old country. It doesn't, this type of law in like the 25% tariff won't be, for example, only for Pennsylvania and Texas. It will be for the old country, I guess. So I'm kind of curious to see what he has to say.
Was very soon lifted. Canada-US trade normalized once again with an updated trade pact.
He's used trade threats to extract certain concessions from others. 2017, he threatened to pull out of NAFTA immediately. And then Canada and Mexico said, look, we're willing to renegotiate this agreement with you. And he said, fine, we'll come to the table and we'll talk.
We spent the entire first term of the Trump presidency talking about what was bluster, what was a threat, what was real. And what we learned is that it was a little bit of everything, but it was mostly a leverage point in a negotiation.
Trump's forte is in controlling the conversation. He puts his opponents on the defensive.
He's always talked about the art of the deal and what a great...
Yeah, it is actually a way to negotiate, I guess. It's more like an aggressive way to negotiate. It can work well depending on who do you like negotiate with. You have like someone that is, I would say like that is not like too much fearless and that wants to like, for example, because in the case of the US, they have more power overall on like they are making a lot of trades. They are the most important country in terms of transactions, and in terms of trades overall, it is the most important country in the world. So obviously they have more power to negotiate, and if he has some aggressive way of negotiating, it will obviously put a lot of pressure on both the Canadian Prime Minister and on both also the Mexican, I don't know if it's the Prime Minister or the President, but they will have a lot of pressure to try to mitigate the risk, because if you decide to put the tariffs, it will have some disastrous impact, obviously, on both countries.
Negotiator he is this really something that he wants, or is this something that he's going to use as a bargaining chip to get something else that he wants?
And we should bear in mind, almost every expert I've heard from so far has underscored the very important point that we are still very early in the game. Trump isn't even president yet. His inauguration is 2 months from now. That's potentially 2 months of back-channel negotiation. And this expression of policy, if we can call it that, was just a social media post. On January 20th, as one of my many first executive orders, I will sign all necessary documents to charge Mexico and Canada a 25% tariff on all products coming into the United States and its ridiculous open border.
This is also important to understand why does he threaten to put some tariff, because at the end of the day, the real reasons that at least he is saying he wants to put tariff on both Mexico and the United States, and something that has been like in the heart of all of his presidential elections, all of his different rally that he has made, and all of his proposal that he has made over the last couple of months is notably to control the American borders. I think that they have a lot of problems, notably with Mexico, but I guess that they might have a little bit of problems with Canada as well. So he wants to, it has been one of the most important key points of his campaign to control the borders and control all the people that are coming in the United States. So it is definitely some kind of threat that he is using. He is using the tariffs as a threat to try to control all the people that are coming and all the migrants, the illegal migrants that are coming from both Canada, I guess, and from Mexico as well. So continue.
Borders. That last quip about open borders is the other reason it's hard to gauge how serious a policy proposal this really is. Because in this post, Trump isn't giving any economic reason to impose tariffs, and he would gladly remove them under the following circumstances. This tariff will remain in effect until such time as drugs, in particular fentanyl, and all illegal aliens stop this invasion of our country.
He decided to attach immigration.
Yeah, so I guess that there is also like all the opioid and all the drugs problems that also impact overall like tariffs. And obviously I believe, and it is only my personal opinion, I think that those tariffs won't necessarily happen, because I think that at the end of the day it will hurt too much both of the countries, like, and I would say it would hurt at the end of the day pretty much everyone except the US government. So I'm pretty sure that it won't happen, but it is definitely something that he can use to try to control the borders and control like all the illegal immigration that is made in the US.
Immigration and drug problems at the border with trade. And that's the path forward. And whether they have anything to do with one another or not doesn't really matter at this point. At the end of the day, he's using this as a wedge, as a tactic, and as a piece of leverage to get us to the table with concessions.
So look, this is a hard threat to read. It's early, Trump can be unpredictable, and if he follows through, he would have to explain to an American public how he so passionately campaigned on a promise to reduce inflation when his day one executive order is to effectively make all North American imports more expensive. But he could follow through regardless. And having that threat out there, hanging over his enemies and his allies, does a lot of heavy lifting in a negotiation before anyone at the table has even said a word.
Yeah, so that was a pretty interesting video because it brings a lot of information and a lot of useful things to the table, and I think it really have a certain impact like on globally the economy of Canada. It could have some disastrous impact if these tariffs were put in place, because obviously it will impact the companies, but at the end of the day it will also impact the people, because many people will lose potentially their jobs if those tariffs are put in place to obviously lower all the cost of the Canadian companies. And also maybe many Canadian companies might decide just to go make all of their operations in the United States as well because of these tariffs. So it won't have some positive impact on Canadian economy, that's for sure. But at the end of the day, I think that it might just be some threats just to have more potential to negotiate. So we're going to be following that in the next couple of months when it's going to be put in power, in the place of power. So hopefully everything will finish well for us, but for our American neighbors as well. And if you guys like this type of video, make sure to leave a like and let me know which type of videos do you want me to react next. And if you're looking to find what is the first episode of this reaction series on my YouTube channel, make sure to check out the video that's gonna be right over here, and I will see you soon. Peace.